Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving right into the foundations and evolution of the American Republic. We're going to take a sweeping chronological journey through the incredibly rich and complex history of the United States. At its core, this is a masterclass in history telling. It's filled with these pivotal, absolute game-changer events that haven't just defined a single nation, but have deeply shaped the modern world as we know it today.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap. We've got 5 main chapters to cover. First up, foundations and early colonization. Second, the American Revolution. Third, we'll hit expansion, division, and war. Fourth, industry and global power. And finally, we'll bring it all the way to the present day with civil rights and modernity.
All right, kicking things off with part 1, foundations and early colonization.
Now, to really understand this story, we've got to rewind to long before any European ships showed up. For thousands of years, millions of Native Americans were already here, thriving with incredibly diverse cultures and deep-rooted traditions. It wasn't until 1492, when Christopher Columbus arrived, that the trajectory of the continent completely shifted. That moment basically sparked a massive wave of European colonization. Fast forward a bit to the 1600s and 1700s, and you see Britain setting up those 13 distinct colonies along the eastern coast, laying down the very first bricks of what would become the United States.
Which brings us to part 2, the American Revolution. So going from colonial settlement to an all-out rebellion, how did that happen? Well, the colonists were incredibly frustrated. High taxes, zero representation in government, it was a total recipe for disaster. And all that tension basically boiled over in 1775, when the Revolutionary War officially kicked off. Just a year later, on July 4th, 1776, they made it official with the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson was the main guy behind the pen there. And after years of absolutely brutal fighting, they won the war in 1783, giving birth to a completely independent nation. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the deliberate two-step process of actually forming a new government. Winning a war is one thing, right? But building a functioning nation from scratch is a whole other beast. So step 1, in 1787, they created the U.S. Constitution to serve as the structural framework. Then, step 2, in 1789, George Washington stepped up to the plate as the very first president, putting that brand new constitutional machinery right into motion. Moving right along to part 3, expansion, division, and war.
The 1800s were a century of massive, rapid physical transformation. We're talking westward expansion, building out railroads, just explosive growth. But, that growth came with a huge price: intense internal conflict. The country literally fractured into two sides: the North, known as the Union, and the South, the Confederacy. The absolute core of this massive physical and ideological divide was slavery, and profound disagreements over whether that institution should be allowed to exist or expand as the country grew.
Those incredibly deep tensions inevitably erupted into the American Civil War, which raged from 1861 down to 1865. It was a devastating, bloody conflict. President Abraham Lincoln was at the helm during this unbelievably difficult time, and his leadership was defined by 2 historic monumental goals: keeping this fractured nation together and ultimately putting an end to the institution of slavery.
And the outcome fundamentally altered the country's trajectory forever. As you can see right here, the Union won the war and slavery was abolished. That fact is absolutely crucial. It definitively closed one deeply painful chapter of internal division and really set the stage for a completely new era of national reconstruction. That takes us to part 4, industry and global power.
As the reunited nation moved out of the Civil War era, its ascent on the world stage was honestly staggering. Throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s, America transformed into an absolute industrial juggernaut. And this newfound might was severely tested when the United States fought in both World War I and World War II. Coming out of the Second World War, the U.S. emerged not just as a participant, but as a top-tier global superpower, taking the lead in economic, political, and military strength.
And finally, part 5, civil rights and modernity.
But having immense power on the global stage definitely didn't mean there was equality at home.
Even though slavery had been abolished a century prior, severe racial inequalities and legal segregation were still very much a harsh reality. So, in the 1950s and 60s, the civil rights movement mobilized. Incredible leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. bravely fought against racial segregation to secure equal rights for African Americans. Their tireless advocacy was absolutely instrumental in ending legal segregation and pushing the country much, much closer to its founding ideals.
So, the crucial point is, where does all of this history leave us today? Well, through centuries of expansion, industrialization, and continuous social struggle, the country is now made up of exactly 50 states, and it boasts one of the world's absolute largest and most dynamic economies. And this brilliantly illustrates the vast, multifaceted global influence of the modern United States. It extends so far beyond just military might these days. We're talking profound impacts on global technology, entertainment, science, business, and politics. Honestly, from the smartphones we're all carrying around in our pockets to the blockbuster movies we watch, the ripple effects of American innovation are literally felt everywhere across the globe. To really grasp the massive scope of this journey, it helps to look at the physical landmarks scattered across the country because they each represent a different era of the history we've just covered. The Statue of Liberty is this towering symbol of immigration and freedom. The White House perfectly represents the birth of that new constitutional government. The Lincoln Memorial stands there to honor the immense struggle to end slavery. And the Pearl Harbor National Memorial serves as a very solemn reminder of the nation's pivotal emergence as a global power.
When you step back and look at the big picture of this history telling, several enduring themes just weave continuously right through the nation's DNA. At its core, it's a story of freedom, the relentless struggle to actually define and secure that freedom, the constant innovation driving the country forward, and a really rich cultural diversity that has been shaping its identity for thousands of years. Which leaves us with a final provocative question to ponder. As the United States continues to evolve, how will these enduring themes of freedom, struggle, innovation, and diversity shape its next chapter? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this structured journey through the past has given you a much clearer understanding of how this complex history unfolded and leaves you eager to reflect on how that history continues being written today.